The U.S. Treasury Secretary just said four words that most people missed completely. Scott Bessent, the man who controls America's debt, said we are in a Bretton Woods realignment. And if you don't understand what that means, you are about to lose purchasing power at a rate you've never experienced in your lifetime. I have watched monetary systems collapse before. I watched the rules of money change in ways that transferred wealth silently from savers to debtors, from the unprepared to the positioned. And what Bessent just said on the record is that it is happening again right now. Not coming. Happening. The last time the world went through a Bretton Woods realignment, gold went from $35 to $800 in less than a decade. The people who understood the transition before it became obvious made generational wealth. The people who waited for certainty watched their savings disappear in real terms. Which group are you going to be in this time? Because the transition has already started, and the window to position yourself is closing faster than most people realize. Subscribe now. Let me start with what actually happened, because the financial media reported it without understanding it. Bessent did not say the economy is strong. He did not say inflation is under control. He said the United States is deliberately restructuring the global monetary system, and the policy tools being deployed are not defensive reactions. They are offensive moves designed to reset America's position in the international financial architecture. The term Bretton Woods refers to the 1944 agreement that made the dollar the world's reserve currency backed by gold at $35 per ounce. That system collapsed in 1971 when Nixon closed the gold window because the government had printed more dollars than it had gold to back them. What followed was not gradual adjustment, it was monetary chaos. The dollar lost over 90% of its purchasing power. Inflation hit double digits, and gold surged to 200%. When a sitting Treasury Secretary uses the phrase Bretton Woods realignment, he is telling you in plain language that the rules of money are changing and that the policies his department is implementing are designed to accelerate that change, not prevent it. Here is the mechanism, step by step. The administration is pursuing three simultaneous policies that together constitute the most aggressive restructuring of the U.S. monetary system since 1971. First, deliberate dollar depreciation. The target is a 20 to 40% weakening of the dollar against major currencies. This is not speculation. This is stated policy. The mechanism is what has been described as a Mar-a-Lago Accord, a reference to the 1985 Plaza Accord, when the U.S. coordinated with other nations to weaken the dollar. A 20 to 40% dollar depreciation means that every dollar-denominated savings account, every treasury bond, every cash position loses 20 to 40% of its international purchasing power, not over decades, over years. Second, financial deregulation. The post-2008 regulatory framework is being systematically dismantled. The stated reason is that regulation constrains lending. The actual effect is that deregulation increases the banking system's capacity to create credit, which is inflation by another name. More credit creation, more dollars chasing the same goods, higher prices. This is not a side effect. This is the mechanism. Third, tariff-driven manufacturing reshoring. By raising the cost of imports through tariffs, the administration is making domestic production relatively more attractive. The cost is front-loaded. Consumers pay higher prices immediately. The benefit is back-loaded. Manufacturing capacity rebuilds over years if the policy is sustained. But here is what nobody is saying clearly. These three policies together are all structurally inflationary, not accidentally. Structurally. The Treasury Secretary knows this. The administration knows this. They are doing it anyway, because the goal is not price stability. The goal is to reduce the real value of the $36 trillion national debt, to restore manufacturing competitiveness, and to restructure the global trading system in America's favor, regardless of the inflation cost. Now here is where this gets important for every person who has savings, a retirement account, or a mortgage. When the government deliberately weakens the currency, the real value of everything denominated in that currency changes. A $100,000 savings account does not become $80,000 in nominal terms. It becomes $80,000 in real purchasing power after a 20% depreciation. The number on your bank statement does not change. What that number can buy does. This is the silent mechanism by which monetary policy transfers wealth, and it operates whether you understand it or not, whether you consent to it or not, and whether you have any opportunity to respond or not. The historical precedent is clear. In the 1970s, after Nixon closed the gold window, the people who held cash and dollar bonds lost purchasing power consistently for a decade. The people who held gold, real estate, commodities, physical assets that could not be created by government printing presses maintained and grew their wealth. The difference was not intelligence. The difference was understanding the direction of the monetary system and positioning accordingly before the transition became obvious to everyone. Let me show you what the rest of the world is doing right now, because the behavior of sovereign wealth managers is the most reliable signal of how serious this realignment is. Central banks bought over 1,000 tons of gold last year, not a one-time event. A sustained pattern across 3 consecutive years at levels double the historical average. The buyers are not fringe economies: Poland, China, India, Turkey, Brazil, Kazakhstan, countries across very different political systems arriving at the same conclusion about where to hold reserves when the dominant reserve currency is being deliberately depreciated by its own government. When the people who manage billions in sovereign reserves are buying gold at record pace, they are expressing a view, not about short-term prices, a view about the long-term reliability of the alternative, the dollar-denominated treasuries they have held for decades. The dollar's share of global central bank reserves has fallen from 71% in 2001 to under 58% today. That is a 13 percentage point structural decline in sovereign savings held in the asset that the world's largest debtor issues in unlimited quantities. The BRICS nations are actively developing payment systems to bypass dollar settlement. The Chinese CIPS system is operational. It processes cross-border payments without touching the U.S. financial system. When Bessent says Bretton Woods realignment, this is what he is describing: a world where the dollar's role as the mandatory intermediary for global trade is being systematically reduced. Now let me address the 2 scenarios this transition produces. The first scenario is a managed transition. The dollar weakens gradually. Inflation stays elevated but not catastrophic. The Fed adjusts. Trade agreements are renegotiated. Investors who hold diversified portfolios, including hard assets, navigate with purchasing power largely intact. The second scenario is a disorderly transition. The pace of dollar depreciation exceeds what markets can absorb. Trading partners retaliate. Inflation accelerates beyond what the Fed can contain. Credit conditions tighten. Asset prices become volatile. The transition feels like a crisis. History tells us which is more likely. The 1971 Nixon shock was not managed. It was a sudden unilateral decision announced during a television broadcast. The consequences, double-digit inflation, gold surging from $35 to over $800, were chaotic. The people positioned before the announcement experienced generational wealth creation. The people who waited experienced generational wealth destruction. The current realignment is being conducted more transparently. Bessent is saying in public what Nixon refused to acknowledge until he had no choice. That transparency is an advantage if you use it. Here are the 3 structural risks I believe are most underappreciated right now. First, the cash trap. Holding wealth in dollar cash during deliberate dollar depreciation is not conservative. It is guaranteed real loss at the rate of depreciation plus inflation minus whatever nominal interest you are earning. A savings account earning 3% while inflation runs 5% and the dollar depreciates 20% over 3 years is not safety. It is slow, certain purchasing power destruction. Second, concentration in dollar assets without understanding the embedded currency exposure. Most portfolios are more exposed to dollar weakness than their holders realize. Third, the timing trap. Waiting for certainty before acting. Certainty never arrives before price adjustment. The optimal time to position for a monetary transition is the period between when it becomes visible to those who understand the mechanism and before it becomes visible to everyone. That period is now. The corresponding opportunities are structural, gold and silver, physical assets whose supply cannot be expanded by monetary policy. Central banks are buying them. Sovereign wealth managers are buying them. The question is whether individual investors will recognize the same signal. Domestic manufacturing and energy production. If the reshoring thesis is correct, companies positioned to benefit will see demand growth that current valuations do not reflect. Geographic diversification into commodity exporting economies that benefit mechanically from dollar weakness. When the dollar weakens, commodity exporters receive more dollars per unit exported. Their terms of trade improve automatically. The framework I offer is straightforward. First, understand your actual dollar exposure, not where your assets are listed, but what currency generates their cash flows. Second, hold a meaningful allocation to hard assets. Sovereign wealth funds target 5 to 15%. That reflects the view that these are insurance, not speculation. Third, do not attempt to time the transition precisely. It is already underway. Being positioned for a transition in progress is not prediction. It is pattern recognition applied to stated policy. The rules of money changed in 1944. They changed in 1971. They are changing now. The Treasury Secretary has said so explicitly. The central bank purchasing data confirms it. The dollar reserve share decline documents it. The people who understand the mechanism before it becomes obvious in asset prices are the ones who benefit from the transition rather than bear its costs. I have been through enough of these cycles to say this with confidence. The transition does not wait for your readiness. It proceeds on its own timeline, and the distance between understanding what is happening and acting on that understanding is the only variable you control. The monetary reset has begun. Most people will realize it only after their purchasing power has already been transferred. The question is not whether this is happening. The question is which side of the transfer you will be on when it completes.